Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we read from Jeremiah chapter 35. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh in the days of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah. Go to the house of the Rechabites, and speak with them and bring them to the house of Yahweh, into one of the chambers. Then offer them wine to drink. So I took Jazaniah the son of Jeremiah, son of Habazziniah, and his brothers and all his sons, and the whole house of the Rechabites. I brought them to the house of Yahweh, into the chamber of the sons of Hanan, the sons of Igdaliah, the man of God, which was near the chamber of the officials, above the chamber of Maaseiah the son of Shallum, keeper of the threshold. Then I set before the Rechabites pitchers full of wine and cups, and I said to them, Drink wine. But they answered, We will drink no wine, for Jonadab the son of Rechab our father commanded us, You shall not drink wine, neither you nor your sons forever. You shall not build a house. You shall not sow seed. You shall not plant or have a vineyard. But you shall live in tents all your days, that you may live many days in the land where you sojourn. We have obeyed the voice of Jonadab the son of Rechab, our father, in all that he commanded us, to drink no wine in all our days, ourselves, our wives, our sons, or our daughters, and not to build houses to dwell in. We have no vineyard or field or seed, but we have lived in tents and have obeyed and done all that Jonadab our father commanded us. But when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against the land, we said, Come, let us go to Jerusalem for fear of the army of the Chaldeans and the army of the Syrians. So we are living in Jerusalem. Then the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Go and say to the people of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, Will you not receive instruction and listen to my words, declares Yahweh? The command that Jonadab the son of Rechab gave to his sons to drink no wine has been kept, and they drink none to this day, for they have obeyed their father's command. I have spoken to you persistently, but you have not listened to me. I have sent to you all my servants the prophets, sending them persistently, saying, Turn now every one of you from his evil way, and amend your deeds, and do not go after other gods to serve them. And then you shall dwell in the land that I gave to you and your fathers. But you did not incline your ear or listen to me. The sons of Jonadab the son of Rechab have kept the command that their father gave them, but this people has not obeyed me. Therefore thus says Yahweh the God of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I am bringing upon Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem all the disaster that I have pronounced against them, because I have spoken to them, and they have not listened. I have called to them, and they have not answered. But to the house of the Rechabites Jeremiah said, Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Because you have obeyed the command of Jonadab your father, and kept all his precepts, and done all that he commanded you. Therefore thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Jonadab the son of Rechab shall never lack a man to stand before me. This is the word of the Lord. This chapter has one very particular theme. The Rechabites listened to their father's commands. They did them, whether you view them as easy or foolish or however you view them. They did their father's command. But the people of Israel, the people of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, they haven't. God has commanded them, and they have not listened. So that's our theme. So as we jump in, Jeremiah here at the start of chapter 35, in the days of Jehoiakim. So we're backtracking again, not a chronological book. You got to kind of keep your wits about you in terms of where you are on the timeline as you move through Jeremiah. So this is somewhere between 609 and 598 BC. It is likely close to 598, 597 BC, as that is when Nebuchadnezzar comes to fight against Judah and against Jehoiakim, and that is what we see as the reason for the Rechabites now living in Jerusalem, is because Nebuchadnezzar's coming. So this is near the end of Jehoiakim's time as king. And then we learn about this man named Rechab, the house of the Rechabites. Now, who is Rechab? 2 Kings chapter 10. We learn about one who's named Jehonadab, son of Rechab, and that's the same man as we see referenced by them later in the text here in verse 6 and 8. Jonadab, the son of Rechab. Sometimes the prefixes on Hebrew names could be shortened. So Jeho could be shortened to just Jo. And that happens several times in the Old Testament. So here's a shortening of this man's name from Jehonadab in 2 Kings 10 to Jonadab in Jeremiah chapter 35. So he's the son of Rechab. He's an ally of the new king of Israel at the time, a man by the name of Jehu. And God uses Jehonadab and Jehu to destroy the house of Ahab, just as God had declared that he was going to do. God uses these men to bring that about. So this man, Jonadab, and his descendants are the ones that we have in view. So that's the Israelite king. So it's several generations previously, and thus the children, the descendants, have had a chance to have sons and daughters and multiply and become a people group as the Rechabites. Now, God tells Jeremiah to invite the Rechabites into the temple, into his house, into one of the side chambers. The temple walls weren't just walls like the wall of your house. The temple walls were essentially rooms, as a city wall would also be rooms. And so you have these different chambers that could be used to store supplies that were needed for the work of the temple. They could be used in order to even provide living quarters to people that worked in the temple and cared for it, and so forth. And so they're invited into one of these rooms, and then Jeremiah is to offer them wine. They don't drink wine, as we learn in the text, but he's to offer them wine. This is the Lord setting this up as an illustration of faithfulness, and he wants his people to see faithfulness, and he uses this to rebuke them because they have not been faithful. So Jeremiah follows. He invites in verse 3, I would take Jazaniah and his brothers as being Rechabites, and he invites the whole house of the Rechabites. So maybe Jazaniah is the leader of the group. Maybe he even ends up being the one speaking for the group down in verse 6. That's really not possible to say, but something that we can at least consider. So now then we come into verse 4, and he brings them into the temple. He brings them into the chamber as he's supposed to. Specifically, this is the chamber of the sons of Hanan, son of Igdaliah, the man of God. That word, that phrase, man of God, in the Old Testament is a reference to prophets. It is used of Moses, Samuel, Shemaiah, Elisha, and David. It's also used a few times of unnamed prophets. So just like an example of saying that they spoke to the man of God, or the man of God came and spoke to them. That kind of a thing. And so this is, again, that idea of the prophet, those who care for God's house, possibly living right there, or at least working and having workspaces in these chambers as well. This is essentially, in verse 4, a call of the important officials. And you even see Messiah, who's the keeper of the threshold. That means he oversees who comes and goes. It's important officials that are now going to serve as the witnesses of this. I don't want to call it necessarily a prophecy, but this interaction of God and man, and that they get to see the Rechabites' faithfulness, and they can attest to this, and that bears witness against them for not being faithful themselves. So Jeremiah puts wine and cups in front of the Rechabites and invites them to drink, and they say, we will drink no wine, for Jonadab the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, you shall not drink wine. I'm going to pause right there. That's it. That's the point. That's the purpose. Faithfulness. They continue, though. They're not to build a house. They're not to sow seed. They're not to plant or have a vineyard. They're to live in tents instead and continue to sojourn all their days. It seems to be, and I don't know enough about Jonadab or Jehonadab to really explain this, but it's a family pledge, right? He makes his sons make this pledge that they're going to follow in this way of life. It's a different way of life. It's a rejection of city life, a rejection of dependence on oneself, perhaps. There is a connection here to Abraham. This is how Abraham lived. I mean, you look at the list. He did not have a house. He did probably drink wine. He didn't have a house. He didn't sow seed. He didn't have a vineyard. He lived in tents. Abraham did that his entire life. So it's certainly doable, without a doubt, and the Lord can bless such a thing. The Israelites, as they leave Egypt and they wander for 40 years in the wilderness, they lived in tents. They did not sow seeds. They did not have vineyards, but the Lord provided. He cared for them. And they annually celebrated something called the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, either one. They use both names, as a remembrance of that care and provision of Yahweh as they wandered in the wilderness. So this is definitely doable, and he wants his family, his offspring forever, to live in such a manner. That's the instruction, and they've done it. They've obeyed, is verse 8. They've done all that was commanded of them. They drank no wine. They built no homes. They had no vineyard. They've lived in tents. They've done it all until, verse 11, Nebuchadnezzar came crashing against the land of Judah, in which case they fled for safety into the city walls of Jerusalem. I'm not going to get into a thing about whether or not that's faithful to Dad's instruction, if Jonadab would have been okay with him doing this. The instruction itself was to keep living in tents. There is nothing that indicates that when they fled into Jerusalem that they didn't take their tents, that they could have used their tents, camped in the city square, or set up their tents wherever they found room in the streets. As we've seen elsewhere in the book recently, the idea that they were even tearing down their own homes to have materials to continue to build in the siege against Jerusalem. Now that's the latter siege later on, but still the idea of a time of warfare, it would not be odd to see something like that. So I don't think they kept to the letter of the law, perhaps would be a way to say it. Now, the next paragraph reveals to us what this whole chapter was about again, and I've shared it with you already, but Yahweh simply makes that point. Will you not receive instruction and listen to my words? The command that Jonadab the son of Rechab gave to his sons to drink no wine has been kept. They drank none to this day, for they have obeyed their father's command. I have spoken to you persistently, but you have not listened to me. I have sent to you all my servants, the prophets, sending them persistently, saying, turn now every one of you from his evil way. Do not go after other gods to serve them. But you did not incline your ear. So because they have been unfaithful, because they have not kept the Lord's command, they rightly deserve the judgment that is coming upon them, which we've gone back and forth, judgment and restoration here recently in the book as well, and it's another example of that. So questions, family conversations that you can have around this chapter, maybe start with this one. What's a command that Dad and Mom give to you that's easy to do? What's a command that they've told you that you've never had a problem with? By and large, I think most of us would be able to pick something. We're all sinners, we all fall short, but we're all tempted in different ways. So even when we look at God's law, there are some of God's laws that for me are not that difficult, while there are others of God's law that I struggle with immensely. And I would guess the same is true of you as well. We all struggle in different ways, and that would probably line up pretty well with the instruction of our parents, that maybe some of our children have no trouble going to bed when Mom and Dad say it's time to go to bed, that they're not tempted to fight back against that, while others are. There will be kids who have no trouble flushing their toilets, and there are others who will never remember to do it, and so forth, right? Eating your vegetables, whatever instructions your parents give you. So that's a good family conversation point to then make the connection, just like the Lord is doing here with Jonadab and his descendants. They've kept this command. Why can't you? Now, you could also then pick up on verse 15, that God has sent his servants, the prophets, to them persistently. Who has God sent to tell the people of Judah about him? Who are some of these prophets? This is just a good Old Testament history kind of thing, to be able to see and make the connections. Who are the people God has used in the past and even into the future? I mean, they could just name off books of the Bible with the major prophets and the minor prophets, but there are also others who do not end up with books of the Bible named after them. Then you can take that question and roll it forward to today. How does God speak to you? This then will become the beauty of Hebrews chapter 1, the very opening of that book, where we read, "Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world." Now, this is pointing us to Jesus, that Jesus is how God speaks to us. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So we would talk certainly about what Jesus has done in his death and his resurrection. We would talk about giving us his Word, giving us the Bible that teaches us about him. Old and New Testament alike point to Jesus. John 15, the idea that Jesus sends the Spirit to point us to him in all things, is another possible way we talk about that. So the Scriptures, the Word of God, Jesus himself. As we look at individual people around us that God uses, first and foremost, primary, according to Scripture, is Dad. Exodus chapter 12, Exodus chapter 13. You'll find many different Old Testament references. Deuteronomy 6, another good one. A couple of the Psalms, Psalm 78 is another. There are a couple of spots that talk about the idea of grandparents as well, teaching the faith, probably starting with grandfather. This isn't to say mom and grandma don't do it. Certainly you do, but the primary responsibility is given to Dad because he is the head of the family. And as he is to lead you, he is also to lead his children. Now, those leaderships don't quite look the same, but they are similar. The other one that we might mention readily would probably be pastors. Just like the apostles would do teaching in the New Testament, so your pastors will do teaching in the church. And this is good, but again, Dad is primary. Verses 18 and 19, Yahweh rewards the Rechabites for their faithfulness to the command of their father. It's an interesting thing, but it's very specifically given to us right here. God said it. He's going to reward them for this faithfulness. And the reward? Jonadab the son of Rechab shall never lack a man to stand before me. That's a really interesting phrase, and I don't know that I cannot 100% guarantee you that we know what it means. That they never lack a man to stand before Yahweh could mean, off the surface, two different things to me. It could mean just generations of faithfulness, that the Lord will preserve this household, this family, and they will continue to go forward. They will continue to have offspring. They will not be destroyed when the exile comes and Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem. The other opportunity here, though, could be a reference to paradise. So not just worldly life, but that the children, the offspring of Jonadab, those generations to come, there will always be someone faithful in them, and that those descendants will be in paradise to stand before Yahweh forever, to stand before the throne of Jesus forever. Again, it could go in either of those directions. I don't know for certain, but Yahweh is making a very distinct promise to one household. He doesn't do that often. The big one is Abraham, the distinct promise he makes of making him a holy nation from which the Messiah would come. So we can rejoice in this gift that God has chosen to give to this people. It would be fascinating to figure out if there are any of them still around. I don't know that we can trace the genealogy that fully and that well, but something to think about. So the point of the chapter, again, just in summary, the Rechabites kept an easy command. Why can't you, O house of Judah?